Imagine a monarch, not only any monarch, but one who referred to himself as the sun. It's not Apollo who was minding you, but Louis XIV of France, a man who thought the world danced in his shadow because he shone so brightly. Yes, people, we are going to go into the fascinating and intricate realm of Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King. He ruled over France for 72 years, turning it into a superpower, covering it with gold, and, well, leaving some dubious stains in his wake. How did a 5-year-old child become the Sun King? Curious. How could he construct a castle so opulent that it resembled stick figures in your wildest dreams? Or how did his rule redefine absolute power itself, as well as fashion and luxury? The title Sun King piques attention and promises a voyage through both the bright successes and the questionable elements of Louis XIV's reign. So buckle up, history fans, because we're about to bask in the light and maybe glasses at the burn marks of Louis XIV. It invites the audience to learn more about the life of this legendary monarch by using straightforward language with a hint of fun. Please feel free to alter it even further. To immediately interest your audience, you could include a startling statistic, a personal story, or even a question. Always keep in mind that the goal is to capture their curiosity and leave them wanting more. The Sun King, or Louis XIV, had the longest reign of any king in European history. From 1643 until 1715, a span of 72 years, he governed France. France became the most powerful nation in Europe during his rule, and Louis himself came to represent an absolute monarchy. In 1661, Louis XIV assumed the throne. As a resolute and aspirational leader, he rapidly began to establish his authority. He took over as President of France after dismissing Cardinal Mazarin, his principal minister. Absolute monarchy was something Louis XIV firmly believed in. He thought that the king had the authority to rule his subjects without their agreement because he was God's envoy on earth. He strengthened the armed forces and centralized the French government through his use of power. Louis XIV was a wonderful supporter of the arts as well. He constructed the Palace of Versailles, which came to represent the might and culture of France. Additionally, he was a supporter of the writing and artistic endeavors of Molière, Racine, and Le Brun. Louis XIV was a complicated and divisive person. Though he was a talented leader who elevated France to a powerful position, he was also a cruel dictator who persecuted religious minorities and silenced criticism. His rule had a profound effect on both French history and European history. His gigantic mansion took 50 years to complete, with 60,000 workers. Yes, Versailles was a whole freaking town devoted to honoring the Sun King, not just a mansion. Imagine the parties that could fill entire countries, the limitless gardens, and the gold toilets. He required special guards to keep him upright because of the extremely high heels on his shoes. Talk about showcasing your style. Louis truly raised the bar on fashion. But hey, even standing on stilts may seem majestic when you're the Sun King. Once upon a time, he started a fight over someone insulting his barber. How silly. Just picture igniting the entire European battle over a bad haircut. With without a doubt, Louis knew how to use his influence. He spent decades imprisoning a guy behind an iron mask, and no one knows who he was. One of the biggest mysteries in history is the identity of the prisoner wearing the iron mask. Was it a brother of royalty, an adversary on the political scene? Louis kept the secret at his grave, and only he knew. Because of his severe persecution of a religious community, some of them escaped to America and founded their own nation. Yes, people, we are indeed discussing the Huguenots. Their Protestant ways irritated Louis to the point where they had to sail across the ocean to form the United States of America. Diskussion outcomes. France was bankrupt because he spent so much money on mansions and wars. As it happens, not even monarchs have limitless resources to spend. France was bankrupt at the end of his rule, leaving a mess for his successors to clean up. The head of not just your organization, but the entire nation. And not just for a year or two, but an amazing 72 years. For you, that's Louis XIV, the Sun King. How did he accomplish this unprecedented reign? Hold on tight, as the solution involves a combination of astute decisions and pure chance. Louis ascended to the kingdom at the young age of 5. He was learning the art of ruling and masking his ennui during long sessions, while other school children were learning their ABCs. He had a lifetime to become comfortable wearing the crown, and a head start because of this. Louis made the decision to rule on his own, in contrast to earlier kings who were guided by councils and counselors. Imagine your mom declaring, "No backseat driving, I got this." Now imagine your mom governing an entire country. That's Louis in simple terms. He expelled the chief minister and declared, "I am the state." Louis was aware that people enjoy a good spectacle. He constructed the Palace of Versailles, an expensive work of art adorned with gold, gardens so expansive, and fountains that it made the residences of others appear like sheds. In essence, it was a massive billboard that said, "Look at me, I'm the Sun King." He was a brilliant negotiator who saw the value of alliances and used them to his advantage. He wed into some nations, made friends with others, and even employed a little friendly persuasion, wink wink, to control others. Louis showed off his muscles without fear. His participation in multiple conflicts helped to broaden France's frontiers and establish his image as a tough warrior. But keep in mind that every empire has its limits, and eventually the resources and patience of the French people were drained by those battles. Even at the end, when he was elderly and prickly, Louis remained in charge. Even though the sun was setting, he continued to make appearances, host lavish celebrations, and attempt to preserve his reputation as the Sun King. Louis XIV ruled France for an amazing 72 years, thanks to a wealth of gold, astute plans, a dash of luck, and ambition. Recall that every king has a tale to tell, and Louis's is one for the record, complete with both high points and, well, low points. On September 5, 1638, King Louis XIV and Anne of Austria welcomed Louis XIV into the world. His birth was greatly celebrated because he was his parents' first son. When Louis was 4 years old, his father passed away, and his mother took on the role of regent until he was 13. Louis had a good and an unhappy childhood. His mother, who loved him greatly, was close to him. His father, who was frequently away at war, neglected him as well, though. Cardinal Mazarin, Louis's godfather, and his mother oversaw his schooling. In addition to receiving a classical education, he had military training. The Fronde, a civil war that started in France when Louis was 9 years old, also had an influence on his early years. Louis witnessed the horrors of war personally during the Fronde, when he and his mother were forced to escape Paris. Louis had a difficult upbringing, yet he grew up to be a strong and driven young man. He was adamant about establishing himself as the country's ruler and rising power. Anne of Austria showered love upon Louis, teasing him with stories, games, and a feeling of his regal destiny. They had a close relationship that affected his outlook on life and his conviction in absolute monarchy. Louis engaged in courtly exercises and simulated battles, while his contemporaries used wooden swords for recreation. As the main minister of the monarch and his godfather, Cardinal Mazarin taught him the skills of diplomacy and power struggles. Even though the Louvre Palace was magnificent, Louis frequently felt alone. His separation from other kids was a result of his father's absence and the formalities of court life. Imagine being surrounded by wealth and still wanting a straightforward companion. France was engulfed in civil war, just as Louis turned 9 years old. He saw threats, rioting, and even abduction attempts. He developed a fear of disobedience and a need for total control as a result of this difficult time. The royal family was forced to leave Paris and was forced to live in poverty and insecurity. In addition to teaching Louis flexibility and determination, this early adversity stoked his desire to create a strong and stable France. Louis had a demanding education in philosophy, history, and languages. However, it was more than simply information. It was about molding him into the ideal monarch. He picked up dance, manners, and even the art of graceful walking. The early years of Louis XIV were a tapestry woven with strands of uncertainty, opulence, and love. He was exposed to the harsh realities of authority, as well as the tenderness of family. His formative years shaped him into the aspirational, self-assured, and often overly suspicious monarch he became. Deciphering the man who would become the Sun King, a long-lasting shadow thrown over European history, requires an understanding of his early years. Instead of being a simple tale of sunshine and prosperity, Louis XIV's upbringing was a complex mixture of privilege and hardship that shaped the man he became. Being a loving mother, Anne lavished Louis with care and attention. She gave him a solid education and a sense of his regal destiny in addition. The first child of King Louis XIII and Anne of Austria, Louis was born in 1638. When Louis was 4 years old, his father passed away, and Anne took over as regent until Louis turned 13. Anne served as Louis's main carer and counselor throughout this period. Anne, a caring and loving woman, raised Louis with great care. She instilled in him the values of education, politeness, and religious belief. She also gave him a sense of his regal obligation. Little Louis was intelligent, interested, and cherished his time with his mother. They would frequently read aloud, play games, and converse about their surroundings. Louis was also introduced to court events by Anne, where he was taught about the duties of royalty. Louis and Anne were increasingly closer during the Fronde, a civil war that started in France when Louis was 9 years old. The royal family was compelled to leave Paris during this time and go into exile. They had numerous difficulties, but they also found support in one another. Louis and Anne returned to Paris following the conclusion of the Fronde. At 13, Louis was crowned king, and Anne remained his confidant and counselor. Louis never wavered in his love or regard for his mother. He frequently consulted her for advice and talked highly of her. When Anne passed away in 1666, Louis was 28 years old. Her death devastated Louis, and he never fully recovered from it. Louis's relationship with his mother had a big impact on his life. She served as his buddy, mentor, and role model. She influenced him to become the resolute and powerful king that he eventually became. Anne used to tell Louis stories about the lives of famous kings and queens when he was a little child. Louis was able to develop a sense of his royal destiny thanks to these tales. Anne fought hard to ensure Louis had an education. She saw to it that he was well versed in philosophy, history, and languages. Additionally, Anne was a big advocate for Louis's military career. She always took pride in his accomplishments and pushed him to study the art of combat. Louis was devastated to learn of Anne's passing in 1666. He frequently went to her for assistance because she was his closest confidant and advisor. Louis felt uneasy and alone when she died. Louis never entirely bounced back from Anne's passing. He started to rely more on his mistresses for company and became more reclusive and secretive. Louis remained to rule France for an additional 49 years, despite the difficulties he had following Anne's death. Known as the Sun King, he played a significant role in elevating France to a dominant position in Europe. Being a loving mother, Anne was instrumental in molding Louis into the resolute and powerful king that he eventually became. Consider the Fronde as a massive storm that struck France in Louis XIV's early years. It was more than a light drizzle. It was a full-fledged tempest that altered his life and shaped him into the Sun King that we know today. Let's examine its effects. France exploded into civil war when Louis was 9 years old, as a result of exorbitant taxes and unhappiness with Cardinal Mazarin, the king's influential advisor. The royal army engaged in combat with the insurgents, who were mostly affluent aristocrats and lawyers. Louis and the rest of the royal family were forced to leave Paris and lived in fear and uncertainty. Louis was deeply driven towards stability and control as a result of this early adversity. Louis grew closer to his mother, Anne of Austria, during the Fronde. She gave him strength and unity in France, taught him resilience, and provided him with protection. By dividing France into groups, the Fronde undermined the monarchy and made Louis aware of the perils of dissent. He personally witnessed the mayhem that unbridled authority may cause. Louis was engaged in political maneuvering and negotiations, even as a youngster. He observed how alliances changed and mastered the art of deceit, two things that would come in handy for him as king. Louis was traumatized by seeing the bloodshed and instability of the Fronde. He promised never to be weak again and established an absolute monarchy in order to fend off any threats in the future. Louis never had a carefree childhood because of the Fronde. He came out as wise, circumspect, and determined to become a strong, feared monarch. When Versailles was built, this need for total grandeur and control was evident. The palace came to represent his authority and served as a means of keeping the aristocracy subservient to him. Despite its conclusion, the Fronde had a lasting effect on Louis and France. It influenced not only his policies, but also his attitude and even the future architecture. The Fronde was more than just a few irate crowds. It was a turning point in Louis XIV's life. The Sun King emerged from this crucible with a legacy of astounding accomplishments and an insatiable ambition for total power. Born in 1638, Louis XIV ascended to the throne at the age of 4. His godfather, Cardinal Mazarin, and mother, Anne of Austria, oversaw his schooling. Louis's education was centered on subjects that would be useful to him as King of France. He gained knowledge of economics, politics, law, and history. He also gained knowledge of diplomacy and the art of battle. Louis was an inquisitive and intelligent youngster who did well in school. Politics and history piqued his interest in particular. He cherished reading about the legendary kings and queens of antiquity and hoped to one day rule as a great monarch. Louis was also well educated in religion. He was instructed in the value of having faith and obeying God. He was also instructed on the significance of preserving France's Catholic faith. One of the main things that shaped Louis into the Sun King was his education. It equipped him with the information and abilities he needed to successfully rule France. It also made him believe that he was destined to be a king and that he must maintain absolute monarchy. Louis researched French and other European histories. He gained knowledge of the battles that had been fought, the rise and fall of empires, and the historical figures that had influenced events. Louis studied the fundamentals of politics as well as diplomatic techniques. He gained knowledge of the various forms of government, international relations, and coalition building. Louis researched French law. He gained knowledge of the people's rights and the king's obligations. Louis researched French economics. He gained knowledge of the various kinds of companies, tax collection techniques, and national financial management. Louis studied military strategy. He gained knowledge of the various kinds of weapons, army leadership, and war strategy. Louis studied diplomatic techniques. He gained knowledge of the many forms of negotiations, fostering diplomatic ties with foreign nations, and dispute resolution techniques. Louis researched the Catholic religion. He gained knowledge of the Bible's lessons, Catholic sacraments, and the value of obeying God. Louis had a hard and difficult schooling. It equipped him well to face the difficulties of leading France. These are a few of the particular topics Louis looked at. A scene from a fairy tale in which a young man roughly your age stands in for the princess. Louis is his name. And you know what? He was anointed French king just now. Yes, this small boy of 13 years old suddenly found himself with a kingdom larger than his bag and a crown larger than his head. All of this took place in 1643. The old monarch, Louis's father, died when Louis was only 4 years old. Poor child, huh? At that point, Louis's mother took over like a superhero queen and ruled over him until he reached adulthood. She managed the nation, handled matters of state, and ensured that young Louis received the finest education a future monarch could require. 9 years later, Louis is a gangly, awkward teenager with a twinge of specialness in his eyes. France, as a whole, was waiting for him. The big day finally came. When Louis was in a beautiful cathedral with powerful people wearing flashy clothing, he received the ultimate upgrade, a golden crown. Whoa! Instant monarchy. Naturally, ruling at the age of 13 was not an easy task. Imagine attempting to handle mathematical issues while overseeing an entire nation. Louis had to pick things up quickly, and he was surrounded by officials and advisors who could aid him in the same way that parents can assist with schoolwork. He needed to be courageous, wise, and perhaps even a little bit sly to keep his realm content and his crown shining. That concludes the tale of Louis's ascent to the throne of France at the youthful age of 13. Recall that despite his youth, he carried a great deal of responsibility on his small shoulders. It's a narrative of maturing, asserting oneself, and possibly even realizing your own dream. A massive golden palace surrounded by enormous grounds that make Central Park seem like your backyard, and covered in diamonds. Well, not really, but you get the idea. That's Versailles, Louis XIV's, the Sun King's, extravagant playground. However, it was more than simply a location for role-playing. It was a massive, gleaming billboard that declared, "Look at me, I'm the most powerful king in the world." So how did this incredible castle come to be? Not that Louis was living in a shack, precisely. The Louvre was the name of his really impressive palace. But honestly, who wants to share their palatial residence with a dull, antiquated government bureaucracy? Louis desired a location of his own and exclaimed, "Louis, Louis, Louis!" and presto, Versailles began to emerge. A whole freaking town devoted to honoring the Sun King, not just a palace. Imagine gold-covered chambers with walls, ceilings, and everything in between, fountains taller than you could jump, and gardens so big you could get lost for days on end, without even trying. It was more than simply the bling, though. Versailles served Louis as a tool for dominance, impressment, and extravagant parties. He did just that. He called influential Europeans to an invitation, showed them his collection of expensive artifacts, and essentially said, "See how awesome I am. Be my buddy." It was successful. The overwhelming magnificence of Versailles mesmerized everyone to such an extent that they nearly prostrated themselves before Louis. Well, not really. Of course, there was a price for all this opulence. Building and sustaining Versailles sucked up France's money like a milkshake through a straw. People got taxed like crazy, and some even went hungry while Louise was enjoying gold-plated cake. However, who cares about a few starving peasants when your palace is resplendent with brilliance? Versailles is a symbol of Louis XIV's power, splendor, and, well, dubious spending habits. It's a reminder that sometimes even kings get caught up in a bit too much bling. But hey, you must admit, the guy knew how to throw a party. Louis XIV, the Sun King, like a rooster puffing out his chest, striding over Europe with his sword glinting. He wasn't just about magnificent palaces and gilded toilets. He also wanted France to be the biggest, baddest monarchy around. And how did he do that? By winning wars, of course. He wasn't a shrinking violet on the battlefield. He charged into battle himself, sometimes even leading the army, roaring like a warrior king out of a movie. He won. He beat up competitors like Spain and the Netherlands, adding chunks of land to France like toppings on a pizza. But it wasn't simply about adding real estate. Louis sought status, that glittering, sparkly type that makes everyone bend down and say, "Wow, France is awesome." Winning wars brought that in spades. Armies from other countries started shivering at the sound of his name, and other kings nearly tripped over themselves to be his friends, or at least not his enemies. Of course, these victories weren't free ice cream cones. Wars cost a lot: money, lives, and sometimes even a king's sanity. Believe me, you wouldn't want to clean up the battlefield after one of Louis's wins. France grew a bit stretched thin from all the fighting, and some residents grumbled about the levies needed to keep the war machine running. But for Louis, the splendor surpassed the grumbles. He viewed himself as a superhero monarch, defending France and expanding its glory like a huge sunflower reaching for the sun. Moreover, who wouldn't feel slightly inflated if they consistently achieved victory? Louis XIV, the conquering king, brought land and glory to France, one battlefield triumph at a time. Remember, while wars can be nasty and brutal, for certain rulers, the taste of triumph is sweeter than any dessert. Louis XIV, the Sun King, wasn't simply about battle and gorgeous mansions. He also understood how to throw a party that would turn Gatsby green with envy. His court was like a never-ending display of splendor, glamour, and grandeur. Pink silk gowns that swished like oceans, powdered wigs taller than giraffes, and jewelry that might blind you with its brilliance. Louis created the trends, and everyone else merely followed, tripping over their own velvet skirts trying to keep up. Balls, masquerades, feasts with mountains of food. Louis knew how to throw a bash that would make your head spin. Literally, some of those dances were dizzying. They even had pretend battles with fireworks just for fun. Louis was a patron of the arts, pouring money into painters, sculptors, musicians, and writers. The result: some of the most magnificent structures, artworks, and symphonies the world has ever seen. Think Versailles, Molière's plays, and Lully's music. They're all thanks to Louis's appreciation of the finer things. Yet it wasn't all just fun and games. Louis used his courtly existence as a gigantic PR stunt. He brought prominent people from all across Europe, wined and fed them in his golden mansions, and basically showed them how magnificent France was. It was like the world's best reality show, and Louis was the star, relishing in the admiration of his audience. Of course, this opulent lifestyle came at a cost. All those parties, jewels, and art projects sucked up France's money like a vacuum cleaner. While the wealthier ones danced and feasted, several ordinary people battled to make ends meet. However, who can refuse a delightful gathering, even if it requires foregoing dessert for several months? Louis XIV, the king of bling and culture, left a legacy of both spectacular achievements and expensive debts. Remember, occasionally even monarchs need to realize that you can't have your cake and eat it too. He died in 1715, leaving behind a legacy as dazzling as Versailles' chandeliers, yet as complicated as the palace's secret corridors. Louis transformed France into a powerhouse, increasing its territory and influencing European affairs for decades. He was a superb strategist, leading his forces to countless triumphs. Under his support, painters, architects and writers prospered. During his reign, magnificent buildings like Versailles and works of art like Molière's plays flourished, enhancing French culture for future generations. Despite being magnificent, the Sun King's extravagance at Versailles left France deeply indebted. The public was unhappy because he put grandiosity over the needs of the people. Even though Louis's battles were victorious, they cost a great deal of lives and depleted the nation's resources. The high cost of the victories had an impact on future generations. His totalitarian reign suppressed dissent and limited individual liberty, even as it brought stability. Later on, this system would encounter difficulties and fuel societal upheaval in the future. The legacy of Louis XIV is a fabric containing strands of both success and struggle. His triumphs are inextricably linked to the shadows he cast, and he continues to be a towering figure in French history. His life and reign provide a glimpse into the dangers and appeal of absolute authority, making us wonder if greatness can coexist with expense and how much we are willing to sacrifice for opulence. Keep in mind that history is rarely clear-cut. The legacy of Louis XIV serves as a reminder that even the most influential people struggle with difficult issues and leave behind complex narratives that we can comprehend and draw lessons from. Louis XIV, also referred to as the Sun King, ruled France for 72 years between 1643 and 1715, making him the monarch with the longest reign in history. His goal as a strong and aspirational leader was to elevate France to the top of the European political ladder. Louis left behind a complicated and varied legacy. He is frequently commended for his political savvy and his support of the arts, which contributed to France becoming the hub of European culture. He is, meanwhile, also chastised for his extravagant way of life and his wars, which depleted the nation's resources and fueled social unrest. Louis consolidated authority in the hands of the king by establishing a robust monarchy in France. He also extended France's influence and territories throughout Europe by using his power. In the past, France was not a single nation, but rather a patchwork of strong nobility, each with its own small fief. Now enter Louis XIV, a youthful monarch with lofty ambitions and an even loftier crown. Instead of being a collection of loose, jangling rings, he envisioned France as a single gleaming suit of armor. Louis did this in order to build a powerful monarchy in France. These disobedient lords used to rule their own territories like little kings. Louis would have none of it. Like bees to honey, he enticed them all to his opulent palace, Versailles. They may feast, dance and gossip after they arrive, but they were not allowed to plan uprisings. They forgot about their homelands, grew accustomed to the opulent lifestyle, and then suddenly Louis was gripping them tightly. Louis, a legislative machine. Like it was no one's business, he issued decrees on anything and everything, from who was allowed to wear lace to the amount of grain that could be grown. These laws ensured that everyone understood who was in charge. Hint, Louis was. The king's authority was meagre prior to Louis. Louis has sealed those leaks now. He ensured that all taxes flowed directly to him, that all judges reported to him, and that he made all of the judgments. With Louis at the helm, it seemed as though France had united into one enormous brain. Louis was more than just a lawmaker and a monarch. He was aware of a good story's potency. To portray himself as the son, the hero, and the supreme king, he employed authors, painters, and even composers. His magnificence was known to everybody. From Prague to Paris, they began to accept it. A king who put in labor occasionally, Louis wasn't your typical slothful monarch. The truth is that he worked on government matters for hours every day, reading reports, consulting advisors, and making judgments. Even when it came to organizing Versailles' next gala, the king was a workaholic. There were snags, of course, a few nobility bemoaned, a few wars depleted the national coffers, and a few people simply missed the bygone era of regional lords. But Louis's robust monarchy remained in place for the most part. He created a strong, unified and kindly France that was sun-obsessed. Thus, this is how the Sun King, Louis XIV, transformed a conglomeration of lordships into a gleaming kingdom. Remember, creating a powerful monarchy requires more than just opulent mansions and priceless crowns. It also requires legislation, effective advertising, and occasionally a great deal of labor. French culture flourished throughout Louis's reign, as he was a patron of the arts. He constructed the opulent palace of Versailles, which came to represent the strength and status of France. In addition, he gave assistance to the creative endeavors of musicians, writers, and painters, such as Molière, Jean Racine, and Jean-Baptiste Lully. Not only was Louis XIV a king with a penchant for shiny objects, he was an unparalleled art patron, an admirer of brilliance, and a connoisseur of beauty. His reign, which lasted from 1643 to 1715, produced a golden age of French culture, and his influence can still be heard in concert halls and museums today. Versailles is a creative haven as well as a palace. Writers, musicians, artists, and architects flocked to this glittering stage in droves, spurred on by Louis's thirst for grandeur and his own generous support. How he fostered French culture is shown here. Versailles was a living work of art, not just a place to stay. Lully's music filled the air, Bernini's sculptures adorned the gardens, and Lebrun's frescoes adorned the ceilings. Not only did every nook and cranny reveal the king's tale, but it also displayed the pinnacle of French artistic ability. Louis assembled a who's who of cultural giants. Racine's tragedies probed the depths of human emotion, Molière's witty plays parodied court life, and La Fontaine's fables delighted with their animal wisdom. Louis became their champion, treating them all like priceless jewels in his crown. The French cultural wave spread throughout the country, with Versailles serving as its focal point. Academies, such as the Académie Française, were founded with the purpose of establishing standards for literature and language. From intricate furniture to delicate porcelain, craftsmanship was thriving. France attracted talent from all over Europe and became a magnet for cultural innovation. Louis recognized the value of publicity. He ordered ballets, operas, and even portraits that exalted his rule. He made a name for himself as a patron of the arts by putting on extravagant festivals and plays, and it was successful. His cultural stature created a buzz throughout Europe, improving France's reputation and inspiring artistic movements all over the continent. However, it wasn't all poetry and sunshine. Opponents point out that Louis wasn't always selfless in his patronage. He consolidated his power and enhanced his own reputation through art. His demands felt oppressive to some artists who felt compelled to live up to his lofty, frequently exaggerated vision. Whatever the case, Louis's rule had a significant impact. He fostered the growth of French culture and left a rich legacy of magnificent buildings, well-written books, and musical compositions. Despite his complicated nature and desire for extravagance, French culture flourished under his reign and made a lasting impression on the world. Recall that culture and the arts are effective tools. In addition to using them to create his own legend, Louis XIV created a cultural empire that still enthralls and inspires people to this day. Louis's reign was not without controversy, however. Both his costly and unpopular wars and his opulent lifestyle left many of his subjects disapproving. He also curtailed individual liberties and repressed dissent. The Sun King, Louis XIV, may have appeared brilliant on the outside, but there were dark corners. Even though he supported the arts and constructed opulent palaces, he also harbored a darker side because he didn't like it when others disagreed with him or had too much freedom. Here's how he suppressed dissent and protected individual liberties. Louis had a network of spies and informers monitoring everyone. Louis loved his laws as much as a child loves candy, so if you dared criticize the king or his policies, be prepared for a knock on your door from the thought police. He created regulations covering everything from speech to religion. You could be in for a big fine or worse if you chose to follow a different religion, voice an unpopular opinion, or even write a play that wasn't pro-king enough. Recall those opulent mansions. It turns out that their purpose was control as well as beauty. There were thick walls, secret passageways in the rooms, and a culture of gossip among the servants. Few people enjoyed privacy because the king's eyes and ears were always there. Being frank became a dangerous endeavor. Universities were closely monitored, newspapers were suppressed, and public protests were quickly put down. As a kingdom, France came to be known for its quiet policies. It goes without saying that not everyone was pleased with this velvet-gloved iron fist. Future revolution seeds were planted. Some intellectuals left the nation, and others complained behind closed doors. However, dissent was suppressed, and individual liberties were closely monitored for the duration of Louis's reign. Hence, even though Louis XIV's legacy is full of artistic triumphs, its shadows serve as a constant reminder that unbridled authority frequently comes at the expense of liberty and free speech. His tale serves as a reminder that even the brightest suns can cast the darkest shadows. As an absolute monarch, Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King, held total authority over France. He held that the king was the nation's duly elected head of state and that the law applied to everything he said. Without the people's or their representatives' approval, he ruled. The unwavering rule of Louis posed a significant challenge to French democracy. It became more difficult for people to voice their political opinions and organize resistance to his rule as a result of his suppression of dissent and restrictions on individual liberties. In addition, he fought expensive wars that depleted the nation's resources and sparked social unrest. Even though Louis's reign came to an end in 1715, his influence on French politics persisted. His unwavering control contributed to the oppressive and unequal environment that sparked the French Revolution in 1789. The king was able to declare war, choose officials, and enact laws. Neither the people nor their representatives held him responsible. Louis maintained a network of censors and spies to monitor anyone who might voice criticism of the king or his policies. He also resorted to the legal system to punish those who dared to criticize him. Louis's laws limited people's ability to practice their religion, speak their minds, and assemble freely. In addition, he forbade Protestants from running for public office. Despite significant cultural advancements, political repression occurred during Louis XIV's reign. His totalitarian reign posed a serious threat to French democracy and contributed to the circumstances that eventually resulted in the French Revolution. He fostered a golden age of French creativity by providing support to authors, painters, and musicians. It symbolizes his enduring influence on theatre, literature, and architecture. Located close to the victory depicting obelisk, which represents Louis's rise to power in politics and the expansion of French territory. The crown stands for his unwavering monarchy, which, during his reign, concentrated power and increased France's sphere of influence. It emphasizes his territorial and military conquests, albeit at the expense of the populace. All things considered, these symbols present a fair assessment of Louis XIV's legacy. They highlight his contributions to power and culture, as well as the difficulties and limitations imposed by his totalitarian rule. Discovering all three encourages you to think about the Sun King's shadows as well as the sunshine by adding another level of understanding. His maze invites you to investigate Louis XIV's complex reign, which included his dual personas as a shadowy king and a brilliant monarch. Enjoy exploring the options and learning about the Sun King's various facets. On September 1, 1715, the Sun King of France, Louis XIV, passed away at the age of 76. His passing signaled the end of an era for France and made him the monarch with the longest reign ever. Prior to his passing, Louis's health had been deteriorating for a number of months. He had contracted gangrene from an infection in his leg. After a hunting trip, he returned to Versailles on August 10, 1715, and his condition grew worse. Louis passed away in his bedroom at Versailles, with his family and advisors close by. France was engulfed in widespread mourning following his death. French politics were significantly impacted by Louis's passing. Louis XIV, his grandson, was merely 5 years old when he took the throne. To rule France until Louis XIV reached adulthood, a regency council was formed. France saw significant upheaval and change during Louis's rule. He increased French territory and consolidated power, but he also curtailed individual liberties and repressed dissent. His passing signaled the end of a glorious but turbulent era in French history, leaving behind a complex and multifaceted legacy. His physicians failed to save his life. They attempted many different therapies, including amputation, but none of them worked. His passing dealt a serious blow to France. He was a well-liked and well-respected person, and the nation was left in suspense after his passing. His funeral was a lavish occasion. The Basilica of Saint-Denis, the customary resting place of French kings, served as his final resting place. After Louis XIV passed away in 1715, France was left in a state of mourning and uncertainty for a number of reasons. Louis cemented his reputation as a representation of France's strength and stability by ruling for an unparalleled 72 years. His absence left a huge vacuum, and his complicated legacy both burdened and inspired his successors. France was bankrupt from multiple wars and Louis's lavish lifestyle. People were forced to bear the weight of the nation's debt, which led to widespread unhappiness and hardship. The consequences for the economy threw doubt on the future of the country. The balance of power in Europe was changing, and Louis's France was becoming less dominant. Internal strife was making it more difficult for France to maintain its reputation abroad as rival nations like Prussia and England gained power. Louis had come to represent France itself to a great number of French people. With his passing, an era came to an end, and the splendor of the Sun King's reign gave way to the uncertainty of the future. Many felt a sense of loss for the country and began to doubt who they were. It's critical to recognize that Louis left behind a complicated legacy that includes both good and bad elements. Although his passing dealt France a serious blow, it also opened up new opportunities and transformations. After his passing, there was a period of reform and rebirth, with leaders like Voltaire and Montesquieu challenging the absolute monarchy and promoting novel concepts. In summary, the passing of Louis XIV was a historic occasion that affected French politics and society. Not only was there a king lost, but a new chapter full of opportunities and challenges was beginning in the history of the country. The Sun King, Louis XIV, was a significant person in French history. His 72-year reign was the longest in French history, and opinions on his legacy are still divided. Louis was, on the one hand, a gifted statesman and military commander. He increased French territory, consolidated the French monarchy's authority, and elevated France to a prominent position in Europe. However, Louis was an absolute monarch who curtailed personal freedoms and put an end to dissent. He fought expensive wars that broke the French budget and caused social unrest. His court was a hub of cultural activity, and Louis XIV was a great patron of the arts. His reign is sometimes referred to as the Age of Louis XIV. He supported authors, artists, and musicians. Louis XIV produced some of the most well-known pieces of French literature and art, such as Molière's plays, Nicolas Poussin's paintings, and Jean-Baptiste Lully's operas. In addition, Louis constructed the Palace of Versailles, which came to represent the might and culture of France. As an absolute monarch, Louis XV felt that the king was France's divinely appointed ruler. He imposed restrictions on individual liberties and repressed dissent, while ruling without the approval of the people or their representatives. Louis's totalitarian rule had a big impact on French politics. Although it brought about a time of political stability, it also fostered oppression and inequality. Additionally, Louis's rule paved the way for the French Revolution of 1789, which ended the absolute monarchy. Being an accomplished military commander, Louis XIV fought several wars to increase the size of French territory. The Battle of Lens in 1648, the Battle of Mardyk in 1667, and the Battle of Ramillies in 1706 were among the significant victories he achieved. But Louis's wars were also expensive, emptying the French coffers. Social unrest was also a result of them, as people became weary of the taxes that were used to fund the wars. Louis XIV's reign had a significant impact on French society, because he established France's dominance within the monarchy and elevated it to a prominent position in Europe. But Louis's total control also created an environment of injustice and oppression. His wars caused social unrest, and he curtailed individual liberties and repressed dissent. Louis XIV was a complicated person with a conflicting history. He was a talented statesman and military commander who elevated France to a significant European power. But Louis was also an absolute ruler who curtailed personal freedoms and put an end to dissent. His expensive wars caused social unrest. Discussions about Louis XIV's legacy are still ongoing today. Some historians consider him to have been a brilliant leader who made France a strong country. Some view him as a despot who stifled opposition and sparked the French Revolution. Louis XIV's legacy is ultimately up for interpretation, but there's no denying that he was a monumental character in French history who had a profound effect on the nation. In the end, Louis XIV is still a complex puzzle. He was a tyrant and a brilliant strategist, as well as a warmonger and patron of the arts. His legacy is a tapestry made of blood and gold threads, a reminder that history is rarely replete with unambiguous heroes and villains. Through comprehending the intricacies of his rule, we can acquire significant understanding of the timeless inquiries of authority, customs, and human aspiration, rendering his narrative pertinent not only in historical narratives and museum exhibits, but also in the decisions confronting contemporary society. Never forget that history is a dialogue, not a monologue. By examining Louis XIV's legacy, we can make sure that the Sun King's shadow motivates us to create a better future without making the same mistakes we did in the past. We can also learn from his achievements and shortcomings. Even though Louis's techniques may be antiquated, his leadership abilities merit consideration. His tactical genius in combat and his adeptness at navigating intricate coalitions provide insightful observations. His commitment to education and his founding of national academies can be considered pioneering efforts at nation-building and intellectual advancement. When these elements are devoid of their absolutist facade, they provide guidance for contemporary leaders who aim to empower and bring their people together. But Louis's lavish way of life and never-ending battles served as a warning. His extravagant spending depleted France's finances, igniting discontent that finally sparked a revolution and hinting at the potential financial perils of unbridled privilege. In an era of inequality and resource scarcity, Louis's reign serves as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the significance of responsible leadership. Populist leaders who establish their legitimacy through a strong ruler persona and burgeoning nationalist movements share similarities with Louis's creation of a national identity centered around himself. This appeal to a sense of pride in the country and a clear vision runs the risk of weakening the checks and balances necessary for a robust democracy. There is an uneasy parallel between the extreme inequality of Louis's reign and the widening wealth disparity and concentration of resources in the hands of a select few. This increases unhappiness and begs the question of whether contemporary societies are genuinely living up to their ideals of opportunity and equality. Despite its internal conflicts, Louis's reign gave the impression of stability and order. Similar to this, some contemporary leaders place a higher priority on upholding law and order, even if doing so means stifling dissent and restricting personal freedoms. But like with Louis, these kinds of short-sighted tactics frequently backfire in the long run. It is crucial to bear in mind that although these tendencies bear similarities to certain aspects of Louis's absolutism, the settings are very dissimilar. With their many safeguards and checks and balances, modern democracies greatly reduce the possibility of absolute rule. Recognizing these parallels, though, motivates us to keep watchful against the deterioration of democratic values and the consolidation of power in the hands of a select few. Therefore, even though Louis XIV's absolute monarchy may appear to be a thing of the past, its legacy offers important insights into the dynamic relationships between power and liberty, as well as the difficulties involved in creating a society that is just and equal. We can endeavor to draw lessons from the past and steer clear of his legacy in order to improve the future. Similar to Louis's censorship apparatus, the digital age has brought new tools for limiting information and stifling dissent. Government control over the media, internet surveillance, and the silence of dissenting opinions all raise questions about the remnants of absolutist principles in contemporary democracies. Even in nations with intact democratic frameworks, there has been a general trend in many of them towards increased executive authority. There are parallels between Louis's centralized monarchy and the leadership of countries such as China's Xi Jinping, Hungary's Viktor Orbán, and even parts of Trumpism in the US. These leaders demonstrate a concentration of power within the executive branch. He brought stability and unity to France by establishing a powerful monarchy. Even though it was contentious, this set the stage for later governments.